Oh, my goodness. You know, what we ought to do is just put one row and say, this is the back row. And then everyone will gravitate to that.
I can take out that one.
And one of them, see, well, there you go. And one of you was confirmed to receive just a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
So you see, you're not a long-term Episcopalian. You haven't learned how to gravitate to the back row.
Very first class.
Exactly. Exactly.
I sat in the front row last week.
Yeah, well, you had to read.
Team player.
You had to read. Yeah. Boy. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4 people, 7 seats. Okay.
What is college and communication? We always had that round circle, you know, and that was just kind of how we worked, you know, because we talked about group dynamics and just being in one circle.
Yeah, it's not accidental that I asked to have the chairs put in a circle.
How's it working?
Not very well. Goodness. Well, I guess we should begin, eh?
It's harder. It's harder. Yeah, it is.
You're really, you four are really gonna sit back? Okay. I guess I have to allow people their freedom. Well, here we are, week 2. Yeah, I trust you all either had booklets from last week or picked up booklets at the door. But to begin, well, I wasn't going to say this, but I will say it. This morning, I hope you hear pregnant pauses in my speaking. And the reason for that is that I made the mistake of looking at the YouTube of last week's session and discovered the appalling number of ums that I uttered. Sorry?
So that's why I never learned. I write manuscript sermons.
It brought to mind the following. I went to a boys' prep school and we had daily morning chapel. And every Tuesday, the chapel talk was given by the headmaster. And the headmaster was an austere Boston Brahmin Quaker. And there's an already. And he used to say, so there were a number of guys who ran a numbers game. And we would all pitch a quarter into a pot on Tuesday mornings and pick a number. Someone had been appointed to make, little hash marks every time the headmaster said, counted them up, and then at recess, the winner would be declared and he would get the pot. And I thought, we all laughed at the headmaster because he said, but as Betsy said, I guess I learned from the best of them. I'm a great ummer, so I will try to have pregnant pauses in my presentation and not downs. Has anyone any further thoughts about the poems that we looked at last week? I find oftentimes I noodle those things in the subsequent week and I say, gosh, I wish we thought a little bit about that or mentioned this or something. So I don't want to rush into this week's poems if there is some thought about last week's poems. Gosh, I had a thought about one of last week's poems. And it's the one that somewhere I have it, maybe I do. It was Emily Dickinson's poem. And I made the comment that I thought that, oops, that's the third week. I have these things so well organized, I can't manage them. Here we go. I commented that I thought infinitude, silence, and creation may have been names for God. And the very moment I said that, I regretted it. It seemed to me as though some of the energy and the intensity of the poem just drained out of it. And I thought about that during the week, and I decided that those three words were not, at least in my reading of the poem, and we agreed early on that there's no single reading of these poems. Each of us reads a poem in our own way. I decided that those, in fact, were not names for God, but they were, in fact, what they said they were: infinitude and silence and the fact of creation itself, which to me suggested carried much more awe and mystery than to rustle them all together and say, okay, she's just talking about God. That seems to package it up and put it on a shelf as though you no longer have anything to think about. The deal is closed. So, referring to my friend Professor Al Kuhn's statement that the white horse in T.S. Eliot's Journey of the Magi could be any of a number of things, Imperial Rome or one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, or it could just be a white horse. I now hold the view that silence is silence, and infinitude is infinitude, and creation is creation. I lost a paper. Oh, it's way back there. I'll get it later.
But I would say certainly it could be God. It's just when different people read it at a different time, it's going to come to a different feeling.
Thanks, Jim. And that's exactly right. Reading poetry, my experience of reading poetry is like reading scripture. I will see and hear something entirely different depending on where and when I read it. So one can read it at one point and it will seem to be one thing, and read it at another point it will be.
You know, when I read the poems for the first week, I really didn't get a lot out of them. But for example, when I read the poems for this week, 3 of them hit me right between the eyes. So you just never know when you're going to get you.
Well, thank you, and you have given me my segue into today's poems. You recall that our plan is that we should read the poems during the week, and then I would ask you to share. Jen. Yes, you walked into that one, didn't you? just, if you're comfortable, would you be willing to share one of the poems and what particularly struck you about it? And we would really like it if you'd be willing to read the poem and then say, yeah, he says he brought the wrong folder. There are some over there.
Well, I'm gonna talk briefly about a couple of them. It hit me for a completely different reason than anybody else could hear. I realized what it's supposed to be. And I actually read poetry for my wife on all the key dates, anniversary or marriage day, Valentine's Day, for Christmas, and so forth. And the only thing I tried to do when I was in poetry is to rhyme the last few words. And that's what he does in this particular one. And so it wasn't necessarily a very spiritual thing, but over the years, my wife, I mean, she loves my poems and she saved them, every one of them. And so that was the reason that one hit me.
You get next Lent.
No,
Jim's poems.
but the other one that hit me is the next one after that, where the dying commentator who relished the former disdain and predatory nature, and it's by Mary Carr. And I read this one, and I mean, it just really hit me. And it's again, not necessarily what I would consider a real spiritual reason, but our last dog that we got was severely abused as she was 10 years old. And she really, we had her for about 4 or 5 years, and she would never cuddle up to me because he had been so afraid of doing that. And on the last day of her life, we went to the vet and she had developed cancer. And we ended up, they put her to sleep in my lap. And then they injected her with the, I don't remember what it was, but she, you know, and within 30 or 40 seconds, she passed away. And I thought, here was this dog that would never cuddle up to me. And here she was, totally trusting me, laying in my lap. And the lady came in to take her away. And she looked at me and she said, I think you want to hold me. And a few times in my life, tears were just running down my face. And I just thought, you know, it was all for me about trust. That dog is on him, not trusting at all, to totally trust. And I needed this at that time. And I read that poem, it brought everything back to me.
Mm-hmm. I really welcome everything you've said. I would only suggest that what you've shared strikes me as not being unspiritual. You suggest that your reading of the poem wasn't spiritual. It seems to me it is, in fact, quite deeply spiritual. I love this poem as well, and perhaps not having had the experience you've had, I sort of liked the fun of it. You know, here's this arrogant cat who's caught a koi or a carp, and proudly brought it and laid it at the feet of his mistress. And there's a sort of one of the nice things is that the poem is such fun and yet strikes a very deep
spiritual
tone. Yeah. Am I the only one in the room that like the poet prays that one day I might be able totally to give myself up to God and relinquish my own sense of control and power? Probably not. Oh my goodness.
Are you talking about the last one?
The last line of that, of the capital.
Well, there are a number of themes that tie a number of these poems together, and so the last one has a similar theme. There I did it again. I am never going to watch a YouTube again. I'm sorry.
Who's down to know that.
The only,
But we're making book, you're just one that's counting.
yeah, that's right. Well, I was going to suggest it's a great stewardship thing if you want to. You know, the house keeps half and the winter keeps half. It's a win-win.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like you're always loss and darkness and kind of a common theme here, all of these.
Well, there is some darkness. Well, Jim, if you're not going to read the poem,
Which one do you want me to read?
well, part of poetry is not just what the words mean, but the experience of it. And I just love this Tomcat poem. I'd be willing to read it if you're not willing to read it, but I want to steal it from you. That's,
You're talking about it or dying.
yes.
Here we go. I remember the long orange cart he once scooped from the neighbor's pond. Bounding beyond her swung broom across summer lawns. To lay the fish on my stoop. Thanks for that. I'm not one to whom offerings often get made. You let me feel how Christ might when I kneel, weeping in the dark over the usual maladies, love and its lack. Only in tears do I speak directly to him and with such conviction, and only once you grew frail. Did you finally slacken into me, dozing against my ribs like a child? You gave up the predatory flesh that snapped the necks of so many birds and slow-moving rodents. Now you're one powerful jaw. Is malformed by black malignancies. It hurts to eat, so you surrender in the way I pray for God before my own death. For let me learn from this animal's deep release into my arms. Let me cease to fear the embrace that seeks to still me.
Yeah, thank you.
That's just speaks to any of us who've held our non-human companions at that age.
Yeah,
No, my aunt died last Monday, Thursday. She's in Canada and she had medical assistance for dying from her choice. And she died in the arms of her daughter. And her daughter said it was the most beautiful death she'd ever experienced. Now, to be fair, she's a little younger than I am on that, how many deaths she's experienced. But she said it was absolutely beautiful. Another, orchestrated the whole deal. You say this, you read that, so you come here, Diane, get up on this bed and hug me. And this reminds me of that. There's a beauty in death that fear often removes from us. And I heard that.
And
not only is there beauty in that, but there's a beauty in life. We just got a new dog a week ago. And, having gone through that with our previous dog who had been abused, we were very concerned about this one. And the first thing she does is jump up on our couch, roll on her back, and want us to scratch her stomach. And Deb and I looked at each other and said, she's 5 years old. Whoever had her for 5 years, she had a complete trust.
Yeah.
And then well taken care of.
yeah,
Because you knew, I'm open to you. That's what she was saying. And it really, I think it touched both of us. So I think yes, in depth, but also.
Yeah. At the risk of taking the sublime and making it ridiculous, our children have acquired a new rescue dog who has learned gradually to accept us, the grandparents. And my last visit, I decided she had accepted us too much. Get away from me. She's exuberant.
Sitting here trying to remember, I can't remember the poem, but I read a poem this week that was basically the theme was to connect yourself with trees and to experience dying or a sense of dying and release to the world each year. That if you connected yourself in that way to that sense of, you know, losing everything and shutting down and whatever, that when the time came, it would simply be part of what you would practice doing.
Mhm.
And so I then read this one, sort of connected to all of these actually.
Well, when you said it reminds me of, I read in the last month a lady that was speaking of about nature. And one of the things she did earlier, she had every student go out and spend half an hour with the tree. And, you know, also did quite, I think that was very shocking. Someone who came back and said, "Hey, the tree like alive," which it is, but we don't look at that.
I don't want to chase this down, only make mention of it, that by chance I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass now, and the whole sense of the connectedness of all of creation, but particularly of living creation, plants and animals, and the what we share more in common rather than those things that separate us, is all very germane to the conversation we're having right now. Someone in a moment ago made the connection between the Tomcat poem and A Tide Like Grace by Sidney Lee. I don't remember who did that, but you may have. Well, Sidney Lee's poem, I had to put that in there because he's a classmate of mine. So I'm trying to sell his book is what I'm trying to do. But there is a similar sense of giving up control and allowing it, whatever it is, to happen. In this, obviously, it is life. And he names it grace. I don't know who Stephen Larkin is. I went online to try to track him down. I think it must be I'm guessing from reading the poem that Stephen Larkin, it may be the parent of the Molly who is referred to in the first stanza. I've soaked up my portion of sorrow, but then who hasn't? Mine can't compare with some I know. Take Molly, not even a grown-up, driving her dad's ragtop Olds, reduced lifelong to muteness and wheelchairs when that truck ran a light. We all could name such loss. Foolhardy, I kayaked across wide water today, and out on that bay I found welter, confusion, endless salt waves racing from north and south and elsewhere because of two big ferry boats' wakes. It was hard to imagine where I'd do best to steer. No matter, I'm still here. For some reason, I dwelt upon my melancholy over absences as I paddled. Brother, parents, schoolmates, friends, mentors. Though I knew my pain paled next to Amali's, I even thought of a long gone pony I grieved for, her forehooves thrust upward toward the rafters, my boyhood mare Miss Prim, all bloated from deadly nightshade. My thoughts ran from grand to petty. You see, as I rode those swells, I should have been focused on where I floated, though my course for the most part seemed beyond my control, as it always has. Truth to tell, it was tide, like grace, that brought me to shore, where I spoke aloud in wonderment. I'm here. There is a darkness, a lot of darkness in that poem, but it strikes me that it ends in a very strong shout of affirmation. I'm here. I read in that, at the very least, I've survived. Somehow I've made it and I'm here. But he italicizes it. And I meant to mention last week that on the very last page of the brochure is a bibliography, and these little items in parentheses tell you the book and the page from which the poem comes. And it turns out that the title of the book, of the collection of poetry, is Here. And here, it strikes me, is I not only made it through this weltering mishmash of waves and currents and everything, and I'm still alive. Clearly, that's a metaphor for my life, which is filled with welter and confusion, and I think his catalog of all the personal griefs and losses, and his own and those he knows about of other people, are the sort of exhibit A of the waves and the currents that throw us back and forth in life. So when he arrives, he's here not only, it could just be a white horse. It's a poem about a guy who goes out in a kayak and gets tossed about and gets to shore. But it also, I think, is a metaphor for life. But what stuns me in this poem is that it's not just I'm here, but there's an exuberance about being here. I'm here. There's an affirmation. It's not only that he's there, he's showing up. And the world, creation, the whole of existence is showing up to him. It's a moment of being alive and knowing it and exalting in it and recognizing it, so that it's not only the awe, my gosh, there's a real world and I'm alive here, I'm in it. It's awe and majesty, but it's also gratitude. Here I am.
What I like about this book was it reminded me a little bit of my life because of the background engineer, and I like to be in control. And I like to control every situation I'm in. Most of the people that have been around too long that probably realize. We've never responded. But as I've grown older and did a number of faith live weekends, ended up praying for a lot of people. And I've always thought, you can't prepare what prayer you're going to say for a person who just tells you what's going on in their life and their life. And I've always felt in those situations that God would through me to give me the words to say. even though, I like to be in control and I want to know the right words to say. But realize that in those cases to let go.
Mhm.
And that's what reminded me of this when I read it. And that's what came to me.
I think that's what this poem in one reading. Obviously, there are a lot. It could just be about a kayak trip, but it's also about.
Yeah, not with me as a risk, I mean, please.
Mhm.
But I too, I mean, the first one, the third stanza where he said, no matter, I'm still here. But okay, I made you, I'm still here, I didn't capsize you, whatever. And then at the end, he says, I'm here. I mean, that shows a little bit of the difference of I'm still here, I'm alive, and then the last words, I'm here. That's good at your point, there's
Yeah,
information.
I'm smiling because I read that the same way. It's as though he said, hey, reader, if you don't get it, let me hit you again with it.
Well, being a caregiver at a young age, I wanted control because I thought I could do the outcome, but none of that, the force bottom one is, I should have focused on where I floated through my course for the most part, seems beyond my control. And that's a key hit. It's beyond my control. I can control me, what I say, what I do, but beyond that, it's like you said, it's let go and let God.
Mhm.
It's, everybody else is their, own being and just let them be.
And the next phrase for me is sort of the arrow that pierces the heart. Beyond my control, as it always has.
The thing that jumped out of me here is the word wondering. Yes, I think it's an affirmation, but I don't think it's necessarily an affirmation of this person's being as much as the affirmation of the miracle of this person's being. It's maybe less on and more here.
Yeah, to that point, the number of things that I can look back on in my life is, I survived. What? So, yeah, that wonderment piece, really?
Well, and that embodies the entire joy of creation, doesn't it? I mean, it's not just, I made it through, wow, that's a wonder, but look at what I'm seeing and where I am. It's amazing.
Beginning, where he's almost the beginning, where he's almost apologetic for this analysis I'm about to do, for this thing I'm about to say, because there is grief in the world for people that must be far greater than mine, because they've experienced a far greater life. I don't know, like framed it a little bit for me, and part of that is probably because I've done a lot of grief counseling, and often people say, well, this is the worst thing that could happen. Well, and because something was sudden and unexpected. And then you're like, yes, but there are those people who watch somebody, go from 160 pounds to 80 pounds and over a year and a half, and that's pretty terrible too. Like our need somehow to try to compare one grief to another, or one loss to another, or whatever. And so, it's almost like he had this set up. I had this I'm here moment, but I realize maybe that's because overall I've been lucky. as opposed to unlucky.
That taps into an interesting issue. We have friends in Columbus still. And we moved here. And then 3 weeks after we got ourselves settled at Windcrest, the COVID epidemic raged and they shut Windcrest down. To the degree that they asked us not to leave our apartments. They brought our mail to the room, they brought meals to our rooms. If we were good boys and girls who wore our masks, we were allowed to go and walk on the outside sidewalks and then run quickly right back to our apartments. So in that sort of closed down time, which went on for some time, we found that friends in Columbus were also shut down, and we began to get together on Friday evenings and have a drink on Zoom or whatever it is that we do. Betsy's my IT person. I sleep with my IT person. And one of the 6 of us really struggles with the fact that he's happy and other people aren't. Which is just a different take on exactly what you're talking about, I think. It's, he does the comparison thing. But he really is Job and he doesn't know that he's Job. I have really tried to get him to read Job and take courage as Job did and go and face up to God and you call God to account and see what happens. But I don't think he's done that. He's sort of caught in this my language. Well, I won't go there. He struggles with exactly the issue that you've pointed to. But did anyone notice what I noticed? That I wonder if my good buddy Sid Lee actually is stealing another poem. Psalm 107, one of the sections reads like this: some went down to the sea in ships and plied their trade in deep waters. They beheld the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. Then he spoke, and a stormy wind arose, which tossed high the waves of the sea. They mounted up to the heavens and fell back to the depths. Their hearts melted because of their peril. They reeled and staggered like drunkards and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper and quieted the waves of the sea. And they were glad because of the calm. And he brought them to the harbor they were bound for. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his mercy and the wonders he does for his children. Same storyline. And
Right.
yeah, I think I will. How about another poem? Anybody?
I've got some this one's about, there's a need about our relationship. And that comforting.
And Lawrence's retort. The song.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about that. Anyone want to take that on?
I think for me, this said, we don't all find God and God's strength in the same place. There's no cookie cutter of faith. And there's a lot of churches that will teach cookie cutter faith. You don't get it this way, it's no good. I remember that. My husband and I went to Curacao, and in Canada, the guidelines one weekend, and then 2 weeks later, the girls meet. And so the guys didn't come home and keep their mouth shut for 2 weeks, which is probably why the guys haven't been happy, because we couldn't have done it.
But the wives were grateful for 2 weeks. That's.
But, you know, my husband came home and he was gonna be priest, coming home. That's when last very long, but he was wide and hard. I came home crawling under the carpet. So humble, and he thought I could get it. You know, like, you didn't get it, well, but it, to me, it's, yeah, there are cultures there, but not necessarily the same way the next person's gonna find it. And that's okay. That's another thing is strength comes. It's an affirmation to me that strength does come, but not necessarily the same way as you.
We went to Castillo in Canada, we went to Castillo in Texas, Canada, and you know, I was an only child raised to be a real man, and my wife never seen me ever cry, no matter how bad the situation was. And at the end of Castillo, I was overcome with emotion, and I cried, and it was scared. She had never seen me like that. And what was happening to me is just a different relationship.
I'm not going to say anything other than for the folks who were in the early services that just listen to the sermon. Just listen to this. It hits on so many of the things that are in these poems.
Well, good. I selected the poems.
Well, and you just cribbed one directly from the lectionary.
Well, I do. You'll find that in several weeks, but the book of Psalms is probably, I mean, it's a great collection of poems. They're exquisite. And it's not accidental that they're here. Yes, I did select the poems because I intended them to be thematically related to the readings. And it's interesting that the two we focused on at the beginning of our session, the Tomcat and Tide Like a Grace, I sort of in my head connect with the Romans reading and trust and faith, the theme that
What's that? No. Well, you know,
You must use the same book.
no, clergy have this thing. You know, I couldn't do a whole lot with Nicodemus, I have to say that, though the theme.
it's the
But the rest of the poems, I really feed off the Abraham story, and the psalm is intended in this case, in the lectionary, to expand that theme, the theme of pilgrimage journey. And so we have the pillar of cloud and goodbye and keep cold. Someone mentioned that, didn't they? Yes, Jim mentioned that he just, and thank you, Jim, for that. Jim started, I think, at the beginning saying that you did like the Robert Frost poem, just because of the rhyming pattern. And that's one of the really wonderful things about poetry. If nothing else, if it just is fun to read, that's cool.
I like that one just because it just paints a picture with words there.
Yeah. Do you want to read it?
Sure, I'll read it.
Thank you.
This saying goodbye on the edge of the dark, and the cold to an orchard so young in the bark, reminds me of all that can happen to harm an orchard away at the end of the farm. All winter cut off by a hill from the house, I don't want it girdled by rabbit and mouse. I don't want it dreamily nibbled for browse by deer, and I don't want it huddled by grouse. If certain it wouldn't be idle to call, I'd summon grouse, rabbit, and deer to the wall, and warn them away with a stick for a gun. I don't want it stirred by the heat of the sun. We made it secure against being, I hope, by setting it out on a northerly slope. No orchard's the worst for the wintriest storm, but one thing about it, it mustn't get warm. How often already you've had to be told, keep cold, young orchard, goodbye, and keep cold. Red 50 above, more than 50 below. I have to be gone for a season or so. My business a while is with different trees, less carefully nurtured, less fruitful than these. And such as is done to their wood with an axe, maples and birches and tamaracks. I wish I could promise to lie in the night and think of an orchard's arboreal plight. When slowly, and nobody comes with a light, its heart sinks lower under the sod, but something has to be left.
Thank you. I really love hearing poetry read out loud. And one of the wonderful gifts is that you read it differently than I read it to myself, and I hear things that I don't hear when I read it. I confessed last week that I have a private place where I go and read out loud. And so I hear myself read it, but it's wonderful to hear other people read it.
This reminded me of maybe 2 weeks ago, in between snowstorms. My eyes were up this much, and I stood there and yelled at them. "Come back
Yeah.
Every morning, I sit down with my common book of prayer, and I read it out loud because I feel it's better to read it out loud than just to read it. I don't know, there's some connection about reading it out loud every morning. But I try to sit down, but I read it out loud, and then it's just so much powerful, and I don't know why, but I don't try to figure it out.
Reading is an interesting exercise. I'm a very poor reader and a slow reader. And Betsy tells me when she watches me read, my lips are moving. I never got beyond reading word by word by word. It was a disaster in college because you have these huge reading lists, and if you're a slow reader, you're dead meat. And I spent most of my undergraduate days being dead meat because I just couldn't get all the reading done. But reading for content, I think you can through the eyes into the mind and you're on. But reading is also a very physical, bodily thing. And when your whole body is involved by saying the words, hearing the words, it's an entirely different experience. And it's not accidental, I think. People pray out loud for precisely that reason, that it is the whole person, you know. Paul talks about praying with the whole body, and it's saying the words, as our daughter-in-law used to say to our second grandchild, who was reluctant at the point where you begin to learn to speak, reluctant to give up his grunts and groans and angry pointings. And Elizabeth would say, use your words. And to say the words it's one of the great human things.
Yeah, and the point about hearing, I'm sure this has never happened to you, but I'll be reading the gospel and think out loud in front of people on a Sunday morning, think, I totally missed that as I was preparing this. Really? I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was on studying happiness. Okay, so totally unrelated to any of this, but they were talking about the fellow who was being interviewed was talking about how we experience happiness and all of the various things that COVID showed that we weren't experiencing because we were isolated. And so it was touch and all of these various things that are bodily. That COVID, because of the isolation, just eliminated. And that we figured out how we can do a whole lot of things because of Zoom and all of this other stuff. But some of these things, you know, the touch on the shoulder, you know, the interviewee said, well, they may come up with some sort of robotic arm that you can connect, you know, a little factor on the back. But you know, there are certain things that you can't do by yourself. You know, and so I think that hearing or even the speaking is that bodily thing that's different than just the act of taking it in through your eyes. Doing it with a different sense is going to bring something.
Well, true. And poetry, poems are songs. Songs are intended to be sung. And when we sing, we become one voice. And so poetry is in many ways a communal exercise. And well, I won't go further because I don't know where. But hearing and speaking are so important, I think, for poetry. I just want to share about the Robert Frost poem that, again, it could simply be a story about an orchardist who has a concern for these trees that he's planted, but has now to go chop firewood or something in northern New Hampshire or wherever. I found what it made me think of was high school graduation. That seems to be the point. If it seems to be the ceremonial in which we say to our children, oh, okay, I've done everything I can do for you. I have I cared for you, I protected you, I've tried to do ABR. But I can't hover over you forever. I've got other things to do and you have other things to do. And so something has to be left to God. It's a leave-taking poem, I think, which really tapped into the poignancy, really grief for me of the, I keep a diary, and the way I reacted to this poem, I realized that neither of our two boys' high school graduations went well. In many ways, they had taken their leave, both emotionally and physically, from us before that. And the very day of graduation in both cases, those days were disappointing. They were not what I had hoped they would be, a celebration, a sort of saying, now you're an adult, you know, we're so proud of you, off you go. And they sort of petered out. And I realized that I've been doing this poem for 40 years. I'm sort of here and there, still in the business of letting go and trying to bless and doing my own grief work over that. It's tough going. I guess we need to wind up. Are there any final comments? I really appreciate your readings and your willingness to share. I look forward, boy, I was anxious to come back this week. Thank you.
And there are copies of next week's over on the
And-
shelf on your way out.
And I did, by chance, David Brooks has you're nodding your head, you must read the Times as well. David Brooks has a wonderful column this week called The Art of Power in a Political Age, and he talks about art and music, but poetry as well. And that art is one way of looking at things alternatively. So I just want to share that with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, there you go.